Story 1. The Tenant. Upstairs. When the pandemic hit, I decided to move into a cheaper apartment. It wasn't much, a small one-bedroom on the third floor of an old building downtown. The landlord said it was quiet, which was perfect since I worked remotely. The first night, I heard footsteps upstairs, heavy, deliberate steps, pacing back and forth. I didn't think much of it, probably just my upstairs neighbor. But by the second night, the pacing started again, this time accompanied by a faint thud, like something heavy being dragged. Curiosity got the better of me. The next day, I asked the landlord about my neighbor. His face paled. "You live on the top floor," he said. "No one's above you." That night, the noises got worse. The pacing turned into frantic stomping, and the dragging sound grew louder, closer. I pounded on the ceiling with a broom, yelling for whoever was up there to stop. The sounds ceased instantly. Minutes later, I heard my front door creak open. My heart raced as I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and tiptoed toward the door. It was ajar, swaying slightly. I peeked out into the hallway. Empty. When I turned back into the apartment, a figure stood in the doorway to my bedroom, a shadowy form, hunched and trembling. I didn't stay to find out what it was. I bolted down the stairs and out into the street, not stopping until I reached a friend's house. I moved out the next day. The landlord didn't even argue when I broke the lease. I still don't know what I heard or saw, but sometimes when the city is quiet, I swear I can hear those same footsteps, pacing just above me. Story 2. The Masked Stranger. During lockdown, I spent my evenings walking around the neighborhood. It was eerie how empty the streets were. No cars, no people, just me and my thoughts. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed someone standing at the end of my street. They were wearing a mask, but not the usual kind. This was an old, cracked porcelain mask, the kind you'd see in a museum. Their clothes were outdated too, like they'd stepped out of another century. I crossed the street to avoid them, but they didn't move. They just stood there, head tilted, watching me. By the time I looped back toward my house, they were gone. The next night, I saw them again, this time closer, standing directly across from my house. My stomach churned as I realized they were staring at my bedroom window. I drew the curtains, telling myself it was just someone playing a prank. At midnight, I heard tapping on the window. My heart sank. I was on the second floor. I crept to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek out. The masked figure was there, hanging upside down, their face inches from the glass. I screamed and stumbled back, but by the time I looked again, they were gone. The next morning, I found a porcelain mask lying on my porch. I haven't gone for a walk since. Story 3. The Echo in the Walls. When the lockdown started, I decided to fix up my childhood home. It was old, dusty, and filled with memories I hadn't revisited in years. My parents had passed away years ago, leaving the house empty. As I worked, I started hearing noises, voices, muffled conversations coming from behind the walls. At first, I thought it was just the neighbors, but the house sat on a large, isolated property. One evening, I followed the voices to the basement. The air down there was stale, heavy. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard a faint, desperate whisper. "Let us out." I jumped back, heart pounding. I convinced myself it was my imagination and went to bed, but the whispers didn't stop. That night, I dreamt of a family, parents and 2 children, locked in the basement, banging on the walls, begging for help. The next morning, I tore the wall apart. Behind the drywall, I found something that stopped me cold. Claw marks etched deep into the wood, as if someone had tried to scratch their way out. And then I saw it, a small, rusted door, hidden in the foundation. I opened it. Inside was a tiny, empty room, but the air reeked of decay. As I backed away, the door slammed shut. The whispers erupted into screams, deafening and relentless. I fled the house that night. I haven't gone back since. But sometimes, in the quiet of my new apartment, I hear those same whispers, faint but unmistakable, calling my name.